Welcome back to History and Beyond. Today, we're going to confront one of the most painful and overlooked chapters in American history. It's not a story of battle, but a story of injustice and survival. I'm talking about the Trail of Tears. The journey begins with a horrifying scene. You wake up to the sound of boots outside your door. Soldiers barge in, armed and cold-eyed. They tell you your land is no longer yours and you have 15 minutes to leave. No time to pack. No time to explain to your children. Your neighbors are being dragged from their homes. There's crying, screaming, and then a cold silence because no one dares to resist. That's how it started. That's how over 60,000 Native Americans were forcibly marched from their homelands, and thousands died before they ever reached the end of the road. Children, elders, entire families. This is the story America refuses to confront.
Wow, that's just brutal. But what was the legal or political reason for this? It sounds like an act of war, but you said it wasn't. The real reason was greed. For centuries, Native nations like the Cherokee, Creek, Choctaw, and Seminole lived on their land. But in the 1800s, white settlers wanted that land, especially for cotton plantations. And the U.S. government, under President Andrew Jackson, gave them what they wanted. In 1830, the Indian Removal Act was passed. It allowed the government to exchange native lands in the east for lands west of the Mississippi River. They called it voluntary. But what kind of choice is it when the other option is violence? The fact that they called it voluntary is a testament to the hypocrisy of the entire thing. It was anything but.
So, the march began. What were the conditions like? They were herded like cattle. Entire villages, men, women, children, and elders were forced to leave everything behind with just a few blankets and a handful of cornmeal. They were told the journey would be short, that the government would provide food and wagons. They were lied to. Over 1,000 miles through mud, snow, rain, and freezing rivers. There were no proper clothes, no winter boots, and no medicine. At first, some tried to walk with dignity, but by the end, survival was all that mattered. Children fell first. Their small legs couldn't handle the endless walking. When a child collapsed, mothers would try to carry them. But when they grew too weak and the child stopped breathing, the mother would be forced to lay her child on the side of the road and walk away. If she refused, soldiers pointed muskets at her head. Old men and women too frail to move fast were left to die where they fell. Fever and dysentery spread like wildfire in the camps, and the rations rotted. The soldiers didn't treat them like people. They treated them like obstacles. Anyone who stopped too long was whipped, beaten, or shot. The snow turned red with blood. By the time they reached the so-called Indian Territory in what is now Oklahoma, over 4,000 Cherokee were dead. The others were barely alive, sick, starving, and broken. It wasn't just suffering. It was a slow extermination sanctioned by law, enforced by soldiers, and fueled by greed.
What makes this tragedy even more unbearable is that the Cherokee did everything right. They didn't resist violently, they adapted, they negotiated, they tried to coexist, they formed a government modeled after the United States, they had a written constitution, they established schools, and they even printed a newspaper in their own language. They believed in the American legal system. When Georgia tried to seize their land, the Cherokee took their case all the way to the U.S. Supreme Court and won. But none of that mattered. Andrew Jackson refused to enforce the ruling. He ignored the highest court in the land, and justice was crushed under boots. Even within their own leadership, a small group, desperate to avoid bloodshed, signed the Treaty of New Echota, giving up their lands. But it wasn't signed by the elected Cherokee government or approved by their people. It was a betrayal from within, used as an excuse to legitimize the removal. This was the collapse of trust, of justice, of any illusion that Native lives had value in the eyes of the American state.
The suffering didn't end when the marches ended. The survivors arrived in Indian Territory to find no homes, no farmland, no compensation, just a desolate, unfamiliar land. Communities were fractured, and knowledge was lost forever. Languages that had survived for centuries began to fade. The psychological scars were passed down from generation to generation. Today, many Native communities still live with the legacy of that trauma: poverty, displacement, loss of land, loss of language, health crises, and systemic neglect. And while the United States has apologized in carefully worded statements, there has never been justice. No land has been returned, there have been no reparations, and there are no major memorials in Washington, D.C. Why is this history so often ignored? It's erased from American memory because to tell the truth means facing what this country was built on. It means acknowledging that one of the men carved into Mount Rushmore, Andrew Jackson, was responsible for it. It means admitting that genocide happened here, under a democratic government with paperwork and military orders. It's easier to celebrate freedom when you bury the people you stole it from. The Trail of Tears isn't just Native history, it is American history, and until it's acknowledged, it will remain a wound that never heals.
The Trail of Tears didn't end in Oklahoma. It still runs through this country, not in footsteps, but in silence. It runs through every broken treaty, every erased name, and every forgotten burial ground. You cannot build a just future on lies, and you cannot claim to honor freedom while ignoring the people you crushed to take it. The Trail of Tears is not just Native history, it is American history, and until it's acknowledged, honored, and taught, it will remain a wound that never heals. So don't look away. Share this story, talk about it, teach it. Say their names because remembrance is resistance and truth is a form of justice.